So I learned something as a follow-up. When do you set up your JPMRC events and why? What time of year?
We always do them in the dead of winter, in the hardest typical January, February months of the year, and that's because in addition to being response force for Indo-Pacom, we've also been the added requirement for the Army to be the Arctic Extreme Cold Weather Mountain Division. So to do that, we've got to do that in the harshest conditions, and so we do it every year in the darkest days of winter, the coldest months of the year.
Yeah, I thought it was an important thing I learned yesterday, so thank you for that. So, Ben, how about you? You're a commander of a training center, and you had some interesting comments as well about the benefits you get from training with coalition partners as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, sir. And I got to say, I feel a bit like the Aussie intern that's been given access to the US board, the boardroom. But it's great to be here, and I really appreciate the privilege. But you know how we do it, and reflecting on it, the Australian Army situation, the Australian Defence Forces situation, where we firmly believe we're in a period of rehearsal. I guess there's four approaches or four axes we take. The first one is to be very clear on our purpose, our why for doing these things with our partners, doing it with other training centres like JPMRC, like KCTC, like the Hokkaido Training School out of JGSDF. And in terms of the clear purpose, we use 4 R's and 1 D. Everything we do is a rehearsal as if it's the last opportunity we can do it. So it's the last time potentially we get to practice this in a no consequence environment. Everything's an opportunity to build readiness with our teammates. It's an opportunity to conduct reconnaissance of particular operational areas or geography that we train in that is very similar to those operational areas, whether that be littoral, whether that be jungle, mountainous, or even up in the Arctic regions. And everything's an opportunity to build those really important relationships that matter when everything else fails. It's our contribution, those human bonds, to the strategic land power network that General Flynn talked about yesterday. Those relationships, not just with our combined partners, but also across echelons within Army, across warfighting functions within Army, and across the Joint Force, which is really, really important. The last reason we do this in terms of the 4 R's and 1 D is demonstration. Everything we do with our partners and even by ourselves, which is increasingly rare, is a demonstration of cohesion, commitment, and combined capability. And we believe that contributes to that deterrent effect that's been talked about throughout the forum today, protects the shores of Earth, and provides a modest but meaningful potentially contribution to that counterweight that was mentioned yesterday.
Thank you. We can do a follow-up with you too, LaNeve, on I'm amazed that you're taking an entire brigade and rotating through the National Training Center or JRTC, and then bringing it into Korea. And how do you mitigate the risk of doing that, and how have you been so successful in that?
Yeah, there's probably a couple different reasons why. The ROC Chief of Staff of the Army just talked about one of his units that went to the National Training Center. They just finished the rotation with the unit that's coming to Korea. So they started the relationships early. They actually started it before the CTC rotation with their accommodating training event back at home station, and then went to the CTC with them. Those relationships will go forward and still be combined with them when they get over. That deployment, though, it's not just a rotation. It's a rehearsal of itself. We're doing strategic lift a couple of times a year, bring in entire brigade combat team, striker brigade combat team, back and forth. So we're exercising, our strategic lift there. They're coming in. All the coordinations for coming into the port, all the coordinations to move them to their camps that they're going to be located at for the 9 months. All the coordination to get them to the ranges for the first time, get them familiarized with the land, and then just they're integrated into the overall plan for how they're going to be utilized is what we would do for the startup of any contingency with bringing in RSOI force that would have to come to the pen. And then it's the same as we're bringing it back out. So we're exercising our wartime focus. I think the risk is always in those transition periods. So you get, and there's multiple transition periods there with that force as they're going through the CTC and then they're coming over. But just like whether it's in Australia or up in Alaska or wherever we go, that initial time to get acclimated, the only way you can do that is to actually exercise what you're going to be called upon to do. The great thing about serving in Korea, there's not a lot of distractions. The focus is clear.
Yeah.
The mission is very, very clear. And my boss, General Cameron, says a lot that activity does not equal something. It's got to equal something. So everything we do is either got to be focused on building readiness inside these units because at a moment's notice they're going to be called upon. So they have to be ready. And the integration with their ROC counterparts is critical for the overall success for this unit. That was a best practice that we hope to continue to do, integrating the two forces together at the CTCs.
You have a mature relationship with your allies there, but still, it is an amazing thing you do. You make it look so routine, so well done, thank you. I'll skip one. So all of you prepare forces to operate in the Indo-Pacom AOR. What is the biggest operational challenge in the AOR, and how do you prepare your soldiers and airmen to overcome it? Let me start with the reverse order. Ben, you want to go first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest challenge from our perspective as a CTC is the opportunity to train together routinely. I was reflecting the other day when I was a lieutenant. The Australian Army routinely worked with a total of 4 nations, and 2 of those nations were the United States Army, the other one was the United States Marine Corps. And then I reflect over time what's changed. I look at the last Talisman Sabre that was referred to in the first panel today. Talisman Sabre used to be an activity involving 2 nations. The last one had 13 nations. The next one will have 17 nations. We call it in Australia the Olympics of War Games, colloquially. We have relationships with 19 different nations that we work with consistently in 10 CTCs across the world. But the challenge is to do it. Just like any relationship, whether it be in life or professionally, it takes time and effort to build those relationships, to find those opportunities, to pursue those opportunities, and to see those opportunities through to realisation. But the benefits certainly outweigh, the return on investment outweighs the challenge of doing that. From an Australian perspective, the 4 key benefits we get from it are culturally it fits. We as an army in our history have never done anything by ourselves. We have always operated and fought shoulder to shoulder with allies and partners. So for us to do something or train a different way to that is almost culturally incoherent, and you have to be true to yourself. The second one is it is demonstrative, as we outlined earlier. It sends a very clear message of that combined commitment to capability, that combined coherence, which I think acts as that counterweight. It really challenges us physically to go and deploy to another nation or to bring other nations in that work together across people, process and platform. That is a real challenge. But perhaps more importantly, it challenges us cognitively. We all have our entrenched mental models as armies, as defence forces, on what the battlefield looks like from our foxhole. And often the only way you can better understand how entrenched your mental model is to see it from someone else's when you work alongside them. So having that challenge of our own logical fallacies and our biases is one of the key things that we get out of it. And the last one, why it's worth the challenge of working with other nations, what I think our biggest challenge is it flattens our learning curve. If I give you an example, from last year, we had Apaches from 16 CAB, from USAF come out and work under a combined aviation task group as part of exercise Talisman Sabre. We take our first Apache delivery next year.
Right.
So that has helped flatten our learning curve as an Army. It's helped us gain time by investing and going to the effort of bringing. None of that was easy. None of it was easy physically, but it's flattening our learning curve. And I could say the same for the K9s that have come down from Korea, the M1A2s that came down from the Peninsula last year. We take our first delivery of M1A2s next year. And every activity, every warfighter that CTC is running this year, US Army littoral craft are helping us maneuver in the littoral areas, sustain in the littoral areas ahead of our own capability being delivered, which is flattening our learning curve. So those are the reasons why the effort and the challenge of working with others is absolutely worth it.
Interesting, thank you. Brian?
Yes, sir. I think the biggest challenge that we see is just the vastness of the region. It's half of the globe. There's a lot of misperceptions out there too, and I think some of these challenges that we have to, when you do a training, all of Europe can fit in Alaska. That people don't understand that, right? And when you take the region and you have to stitch exercises with allies together, with training events in different locations, and I think the 4RSD is exactly what you get out of that stuff. We're not going to fight independently. We're going to fight with our joint partners. We're going to fight with our allies. We're going to go and do that. But the vastness, the air, the maritime, the land, it's incredible. And to think how, if we do not put our correct structure together and array the forces in the right places. I mean, it took us several years in World War II. It took 6 corps, 22 divisions to gain back. We can't afford to be out of position again, and I think that's one of the challenges that we have, is to have the right force mix in the right position throughout the Pacific.
Thank you. Nahom?
Well, there's certainly, as mentioned by Chris, the challenges of the integration with our key allies and information sharing. That'll always be a problem, and that's a problem. That's a difficulty and a challenge in most places. I think which makes the Pacific very unique and where we operate a little bit along the lines of what Brian was saying is the ranges. We have an Air Force that was really designed, much of it before the Cold War ended, with Europe in mind. And so I got aircraft that were designed to land on nice clean runways in Europe with European ranges. Now I have Pacific ranges, and the runway at Tinian and Saipan and Imoto aren't quite what you see in places in Europe. So we have to adapt. And I'll tell you, what we're finding as we exercise is we've got to figure out ways to operate differently with the people and the equipment, and there's risk in there. And as leaders, we've got to find out where that risk is, and we have to take measured, smart risk in training. If we don't do that, we're not going to be ready when it comes time to operate. Some of the examples in the air piece is operating on runways that are frankly too small for fighter operations, but still operating safely, without arresting cables, without instrument approaches so we can fly through weather, because they just don't exist in some of these places that we're going to need to operate in the Pacific. And we have got to train to it, brief to it, safely learn how to operate it, because we cannot wait for the shooting to start for that to operate. The last thing I'll say is the logistics challenge is huge. We're used to coming in so big. If you look at what's written to deploy an F-35 squadron, I need more than a C-17 of gear per airplane I deploy in. We're just not going to have that kind of logistics flow in any kind of relevant timeline. So not only learning to come into places you're not comfortable operating, but learning to come in small and operate with some of the stuff that's there, that's either pre-positioned or available based on the local economy that you get your hands on. The hardest thing we're going to have to move for us, from the air perspective, is fuel and bombs. Right? And so I've got to figure out how to have some of that stuff in the places where I need to put airplanes that are needed to support the joint force, because it might be very challenging to get that stuff there when a contingency is already started.
I could do a follow-up. You mentioned that now you're practicing, you're exercises to operate off small dispersed airfields. What does the Army need to do differently to help you? What protection capabilities, sustainment capabilities that we need to do, pick up to support you in your new mission?
Well, I tell you, I think the seed has been set. We talked about this exercise we did about a month ago called Agile Reaper down in Guam and the Tinian down the cluster there. I'd spoken to General McFarland about it, First Corps. He actually sent some of his team during DD Day to watch, and their mind started running about there's many ways the Army can support those operations, and we can support them because we're going to be in a lot of the same locations.
Right.
But you look at these airfields. We landed the first day we landed. We did several millions of dollars of damage to one of the F-22s because we're landing on rocks and gravel, and those things find themselves in the engines. And these are the kind of things that we've got to learn to operate a little bit differently. And I think there's such an opening for the Army and the Air Force and the other service too, but specifically the Army and the Air Force to operate together and be very cooperative for our operations in the South Pacific.
Many of these things are lessons relearned. General LaNeve and I did this in Kandahar. We repaired runways and we refueled fighters and C-17s from our 4th Support Battalion. Army troops pumping gas in the Air Force aircraft. And little did you know that fuel came from a tanker truck from Pakistan, and we mixed it and turned it into JP8. You still think it though, so.
That's a hell of a reporter survey. A couple $1 million for landing on rocks. Glad I wouldn't have to do that.
So Chris, your biggest challenge, how do you prepare your soldiers to overcome it?
So yes, I agree with everything you just said. Our piece there is when you look at the map, the neighborhood's not as great, and we're there. So the tyranny of distance, I'm thinking of the forces that would have to come and assist if needed. But if you look at the area, there's an incredible opportunities that exist. And I'll just give you a couple. Some of the higher level exercises that go on, there's opportunities for our cab to be able to do carrier landings. With our rotary wing aircraft, there's opportunities to do a lot of different joint exercises. For us, though, when you think about the commitment that we've had for decades now, we have our only forward stationed division in our Army in Korea. That is a clear demonstration of the ironclad commitment to the alliance. And that division is the only division in our Army that's actually combined. So it's a combined division with our ROC departments. So the interoperability is being worked the whole time. We talked about this yesterday. Every rotation that I ever did is either a COG or a commander of a CTC, where we had different partners or allies that went through the rotation with some type of level of U.S. force. The commanders always talk. The challenges in the beginning was the technical aspects of interoperability and how they were going to do a combined operational picture for their unit. At the end of the exercise, what always came back was the lesson that they learned was the human side and how they were able to quickly connect under a crucible together to be able to pass what we needed to pass and to be able to get an understanding of the capabilities of the force together. We had the luxury to be able to exercise that each day in every training event that's going on the pen, and there's hundreds of them. The ROC Chief of Staff of the Army talked about that earlier, 198 or so per year. What we have to do is be able to take the lessons learned from those and quickly integrate it with units that have to come across that vast distance to integrate and to be able to fight on the pen. So those are the things we wrestle with.
You truly have a fight tonight focus there.
Yeah.
It could happen in no notice. And you can't learn how to get it right. You have to get it right before that happens. So very true. So you all, I won't start with you, but you all talked about you know, the importance of training with allies and partners. How do you overcome the technology issues? You know, we saw the pictures of the 5 nations firing HIMARS together and using some technical integration, some procedural integration. So how difficult is it for you to overcome challenges from a technology point of view, interfacing with your partners and allies? If I may start with Ben, with you.
Yes, so that's a good question. It's a routine chestnut that we have to deal with, not just the technologies, but just the different systems, the different platforms, different logistic systems, different classes of supply, different industry support, going back through the sustainment chain. When we look at integration, we define it 3 ways. There's people, there's processes, and there's platforms. And for us, the most important of that is people, not just in the here and now, working together, but quite often when a platoon commander from Australia and a platoon commander from USAF and a platoon commander from the JGSDF are doing a jungle rotation in Australia, that creates that temporal integration effect as they work together. But in 20 years' time, all of those 3 might be brigade commanders. It's that longitudinal investment in people, so it's temporal and longitudinal. And in our experience, when you get the people dynamic right, they will find ways to find coherent process together and to work around some of the technology or some of the platform constraints, realities, restrictions, and opportunities. So getting the people thing right is the most important. And my experience is that all the nations we work with, all 19, the people work together very well, even when there are language barriers. Soldiers and young officers find a way through that, find a way around it. But then, yeah, working through the processes, and the Chief of Army spoke about that with the fire systems earlier today, across the different fire units firing in Talisman Sabre last year, and finding a way to make those processes work, and then the platforms. There's a bit of a quest that, hey, we can find this utopia of all the platforms or the technologies integrating with each other, talking with each other. But I actually think that that's the good people who are integrated and who find good processes together will find a way around those technology issues.
I personally know how difficult it is to integrate just within the U.S. military. So from a technology point of view, so you're very right. That is probably the last thing that'll happen. But I do appreciate your approach. You know, the human interaction is the way to solve that problem. So Brian, you have a little different problem or challenge that you have forces that are deployable throughout the AOR, and your folks there in Alaska, but you just understand you just did a jump down in Indonesia. So how do you do the interaction with the Indonesians from Alaska, and so that when you jump in there, you link up with them, you know what's going on?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Ben said some great things already, but I think we train in some of the harshest conditions in the world. Has anybody changed a tire out in Hawaii lately? Raise your hand if you changed a tire. Ever. Okay, good couple people. Anybody change a tire in the rain? Okay, in real hot weather, 100 degrees, maybe more. Okay, has anybody changed a tire at 40 below zero? Yeah, you don't like that. That's the least of the environments that you want to change a tire in. But it's always easier to go from those extreme temperatures and cold to go to the summer, vice the other way around. So we routinely, because we have that Arctic moniker and have that requirement, we have to be able to do both, and that just makes tougher soldiers. When you've got to train in that environment and then turn around in a couple weeks later, go into Indonesia or Malaysia where it's, you've got literally 150 degree temperature difference. That's toughness, and that's really what we've got to be able to do with our soldiers today, with all our military, is really be able to do the hard things in the toughest environment. There's no shortcuts for it. You can't train in a lab, you can't put the air condition on real high. You got to get out there in the environment, and once you experience that, the repetitions with all that gives you the experience so that you can routinely do it. And I think the more often that we do it with our allies and partners, the better off we're going to be. Multi-echelon interoperability, all that is key. But as Ben said, it's really coming down to people and people. And the military diplomacy is a really big thing, as Ben had mentioned. I mean, those are lasting relationships and make a difference over the years.
But you mentioned similar challenges, bringing in forces into Alaska and teaching them how to operate in the cold. And then even you had a uniform equipping type challenges. So you want to talk about a little bit different technology thing, but it's how to operate in a different environment.
Yeah, it is. It's challenging until you have to do it, like you do in Alaska. Not all units do, and I do. Brian talks about bringing Army units in the wintertime, and it's tough. I get challenged doing that with a lot of Air Force units because I do get concerned that they're not equipped or trained. And if they were to have eject out of an airplane or do have a disaster, we may actually be putting people in danger. So it is a concern to get airmen ready for the cold. The Army's done a much better job with the clothing and the training, and we in 11th Air Force have been working very closely with 11th Airborne, jumping in on their clothing allotments and jumping in on their training to get our airmen trained to a certain level. They train the aviators. We all go to cool school, but the basic airmen out there, we're not getting trained. Yet, we talk about changing a tire at 40 below. Try changing a C-17 tire at 40 below. That takes a couple hours to change. And so we want to make sure that the airmen are equipped. On the ally side and the integrating with our partner nations, it's very critical to do that very often because it does not come naturally on day one. The first day of an exercise, we had the Italians up last week on the range with us. Day 1, 2, 3 are tough. And then we start figuring out how to integrate our airplanes, how to integrate our tactics, and how to move forward. And it gets better. We've got to do that repetitively, especially with our Pacific allies, because not all are in naturally in a lot of the exercises we fly in. They're not part of NATO and things of that nature. We do very well with our Australian allies. We do very well with our Japanese and Korean allies because we're stationed there and we fly and work with them every day. The others, we don't get as many reps and sets, and we just can't get enough. The one thing I'm encouraged, there are some technologies out there that we're all adopting. One is the F-35. It sounds kind of crazy, but I worry very much about security in the Arctic, in the air domain. And there's 8 Arctic nations, 7 of them are NATO, and 5 of those nations are all flying the F-35 now, or soon be flying it. And there's ways that we can integrate and do things that we have not been able to do in the past.
Fascinating. Thank you. You want to talk about that?
Sure, I'll hit 2. You talked about technology issues. So 8th Army, that hat that I wear, they're executing that every single day. On the other side of the house, the CFC hat that I wear, that's utilizing our go-to-war technology that we would have to utilize. And as the chief of staff of that formation, we're exercising that weekly. Every day, but weekly I get touch points with the staff on how we're going to transition. So it's a constant utilization of really depending on what level that you're at. If you're at the tactical level, 8th Army, you're fully involved. At a higher level, at the CFC, utilizing those networks for the common operating picture across the board, to be able to paint the picture to the general, the camera, and the team. It's being utilized constantly.
I'm going to work in a couple of audience questions that keep the audience involved. And I got a question for General Eifler about what animal did you kill to get those socks?
No, these are, the shoes? Yeah, these are Army issues, so I'm not sure what they killed to do that, but I'm pretty sure they're leather. No exotic story there.
So, and Chris, to you, what best practices from your combined headquarters, what you're just talking about, in training with the ROK Army, do you think could be applied more broadly in the region with the U.S. forces and other coalition partners?
I think that's a great question.
About the boots? Were they animals?
They're not the boots, and I forget what they were, but we answered it here a couple of times, and the other panels talked about it. It's repetitive use, and the only way to be to fully understand the system, or whatever you're working on, is you got to use it. It's like getting a new computer. It looks great, but if you don't turn it on, it's just a rock sitting on a desk someplace. You got to get in, you got to use it, and you got to push it to the capabilities of what it was supposed to be intended for, to be able to link that with each other for the common purpose that we're supposed to be working on. So if you don't do it, if you don't use the technology and have the capability to do this constantly over time with the personal side of it, it's really hard to integrate.
I got some really tough questions here. Good job, audience. Keep them coming. There's a lot of industry here, so I'll work in an industry question for you, General Eifler. Can you describe, do you have a relationship with industry between the 11th Airborne and to be able to operate, to give you the capabilities you need to operate in the Arctic environment? Do you have any gaps that really are out there pressing that will allow you to better prepare your soldiers for what you need to do?
Yeah, we do have a relationship with industry, and we use a lot of AFC and DevCom to facilitate some of that stuff. We've got the DevCom rep in my headquarters. This last JPMRC, we did about 45 experiments and testing with industry partners to figure out how to function and operate at temperatures that blow people's minds, quite frankly. And most of our equipment in the world is not designed to operate and function in those temperatures, so it's really critical. And we also tap into not just industry, but also the Alaska Native population that have lived and survived subsistently for decades, for centuries in that environment. And we find that sometimes the more technologically advanced you get, the more prone to breakdown and those extreme temperatures. You need something that's more mechanical, and so we're challenged with things like battery life. We're challenged with energy, fuels, and things like that we have to always be on the edge of innovative future capabilities. Otherwise, we'll just be cold and tired and worthless. So we continue to do that every winter is a chance to excel.
I'm glad to hear you have a way to articulate your needs and get them met. So you're smiling though.
No, it just made me think we were on that exercise and we were on the island of Tinian, and we were talking about the survival gear that our pilots had to fly with, and they were talking about these fishing kits that they designed for down there that they would have in case they needed to fish. And we had a Guam National Guard Army officer there. He just looks at us and goes, my family's been fishing these waters for 4,000 years. You might want to ask us what we think.
Yeah.
And it goes exactly what Brian said too. We can learn so much from the local populations in all these locations, especially in Alaska. Not only the native Alaska populations, but we actually learn a lot about the Alaskan aviation community as well. They've been operating up here for a long time, and they do it quite well in these austere conditions.
Okay, I'll save that. There's a question on AI I'll save for you later, but let me go back to preparing your troops for the AOR. So we talked yesterday in our prep about the need to bring training to the point of need. And can you give some examples, anyone on the panel, to talk about why that's important and how do you do it? I think you all have examples of doing that.
Yeah, thanks, sir. Look, everyone agrees here that culture matters, history matters, and geography matters. Australia's a big country. It's mostly empty, a bit like Alaska, and Army is really dispersed across it in what I unashamedly boast as the world's best training areas, our field of dreams. But the geography compels the Combat Training Centre, in our case, our version of JPMRC or CRTC or CMTC, to take training to the point of need. By example, from our home station, which is just next to the barrier reef, which sounds idyllic, To take training to organisations in Perth is 4,500 kilometres. Into Darwin it's 3,000. We're running an activity down near Adelaide right now, about 3,000 kilometres away in a desert. If you want to fake the Mars moon landing or the Mars landing, go to the desert in South Australia. But we're also, concurrently running activities up in North Queensland. So really the geography compels us to be able to do that. And, since about 2003 when we were created, CTC's model has been to take training to the point of need, and that is replicated by JPMRC, it's replicated by some of the other CTCs, but not many. And we developed what we call a travelling circus. It fits on the back of vehicles, some of it goes into aircraft, but it is then capable of designing and conducting and delivering safe and effective training in the most austere locations with a very light footprint, but with the realism and immersion and challenge that you need for advanced collective training with not only your own capabilities, but your partners and allies. And not only does it suit our geography, but it's cost effective. To move a brigade from Darwin to the east coast of Australia costs about 10 to 15 million Australian dollars. To move CTC to Darwin costs about $250,000. So there is a cost effectiveness involved in the equation. But what I would say is increasingly for us, our challenge in the Australian Army and CTC is to take some of that further beyond our shores and into the region with the consistency to take training to the point of need of our partners who so routinely come to Australia. All 40 activities we run this year will have partners and allies involved in them. And our ability to take our training to the point of need within our region is something that we need to continue to develop.
Ryan, in Alaska, you have the opportunity to move your training site to wherever you want to train to achieve the effect you want. How do you do that, and what benefit does that give you? Much like what Ben was talking about, moving the CTC the troops, you can move the troops and the CTC to where you want to go to develop a particular capability. So
yeah, we've got enormous training areas, as Joe Nahom had mentioned, and airspace is another great thing that we can use that really expands. But really, when you can do a deep attack with aviation, which most people just do in simulation, when you can physically do a deep attack with combat aviation, with air defense emitters, at distance, at range, and really press the formations, when you can do air assault operations at range, when you can do 350, 400 mile out of sector missions into the Arctic Circle with combined effort with the Air Force. Those really test the limits of what we try to do in our JPMRC. But it also, as the D in the 4RD that demonstrates our capability, we're not just doing this little thing here. We can actually go out in the most extreme regions, whether it's out at Shimya, out in Attu, on the Aleutian Islands, or in Nahom, or at Udiavik Barrow, up in the northern tip of Alaska. We can move assets, capabilities in places and go places, and that get our potential adversaries sort of a little bit of a head scratcher. So I think that's what's important about being not only training, we're also demonstrating a capability and an ability to move to it.
how about from the Air Force's point of view?
I would say that there's opportunities certainly in Alaska in the non-kinetic side, but you don't see other places. We can do things like GPS jamming and do things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do at Nellis, close to LA Center and things like that. So there's